All right. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you all again for tuning in. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know had a technical difficulties, but we're going to get through it, and we're going to make this very powerful this Saturday morning. So without further ado, we're going to get into our panelists. We are going to let them introduce themselves, their background, their education, and how they're going to be a pivotal moment in the conversation. So we're going to start.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our summit. My name is Joan Washington, and I'm an educator, and I'm just the TMB Global Foundation, and I'm the head of communications and global planning. I have a master's degree in teaching education. I have a master's of science and technical management. I'm a world traveler, and I'm just so excited just to be a part of the mix. And I'm just going to enjoy this and to input where I can. Thank you.
Awesome. So these are our panelists that have joined us here in Detroit, but we do have other panelists that are joining us virtually, and we would like to start with Mr. Carl.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carl Williams. I am a film producer. I have 13 years experience in the industry, registered vendor. By vendor, I mean, producer, independent producer with several different networks, production companies to work on digital media content as well as live programming. I've been joining the panel. I'm joining the panel today to kind of talk about how documenting this can be impactful for the youth, because I'm a firm believer that what we leave behind is the most important thing.
My name is Dr. Lindsay Gary. I'm based here in Houston. I'm a professor, scholar, an Afrocentric entrepreneur. I'm also a conceptual diaspora artist, as well as a cultural curator. Really, really excited to share more about the importance of Black history, more about the importance of Black literature for Black communities and beyond. And looking forward to the rest of the conversation. I don't know what else we were sharing, but hopefully that will suffice. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Again, my name is Maura McKenzie, and I am a licensed social worker, and I also work as a psychotherapist part-time. So I'm glad that I was able to join today to talk about mental health and its impact on our Black community, especially in youth. And I'm looking forward to the sharing and partaking in knowledge here today.
My name is Teresa Carter, and I have a background in a doctorate in adult and continuing education with the emphasis on health promotion and planning. I conduct public health research. I'm primarily interested in, as I connect with the Global News Network, documenting what happened to us as a people during the pandemic.
What could a documentary look like to express the momentum of authentic memory for the compassionate resistance to the annihilation of Black history? What would that look like?
In my personal opinion, when you begin to document anything that is of relevance, you have to first find out the core issues, then have experts speak to the core issues. After you have experts speak to the core issues, you go in further in depth with people who are living the experience. And I think that a collection of those three things, visually gratify on screen is the best way to make that happen for something like, the impact that, racial relations has had on our community. We need to tackle education, a strong look into the education system. We need to more talk about our spiritual awakening. And along with our spiritual awakening, we need to have people who have experienced these types of things, past, present, and possibly in the future with our youth. I think combining the three of those is bridging the gap, kind of what I think is the best way to do that.
Why do we need to teach beyond slavery? And if not taught to our children, where do you see the future of Black America?
Okay, if not taught. Okay, thank you. Well, first, before I answer that, I wanted to also chime in a little bit on the previous question. You did say we had 90 seconds. I just wanted to say that I agree with what Mr. Carl Williams was saying, but I also want to add, in terms of the question itself, that you were asking about the annihilation of Black history. And I think we have to be careful with our terms a little bit too, because Black history has not been annihilated. That implies that it's been destroyed. You know what I mean? And it still exists. It's just a matter of us protecting it and teaching it and preserving it. So I don't believe that our history or our people have been destroyed. I do believe that it's an attempt to do those things, right? So I just want to clarify that. But in terms of going beyond slavery, that is of great importance. As many of you know, Black history goes beyond the United States. It goes beyond the Americas, and it goes beyond the recent, 500 years or so. It's ancient. Black people and African people were the first people on this, as human beings, that walk this earth. And so when you think about just how long of history that could be, going back to ancient times, many of us don't even understand ancient times weren't just a long time ago, but that it was a long time period. So we have hundreds of thousands of years of history. Slavery is, if we count the year 1444 as the beginning of what we call the European slave trade, or the transatlantic slave trade, up until the year 1888 when it ended in Brazil, you have a 444-year period. And so when you talk about 444 years versus hundreds of thousands of years, we're really leaving out a lot of history about our people and our contributions. And so for that reason, it's very important for us to understand what was happening in ancient Africa, what we're doing, our civilizations, from Mali to Great Zimbabwe. If we don't talk about those things, we don't know where we really came from, right? It's important to discuss the period of enslavement so that we understand how we were able to be resilient and maintain our cultural connections and build new cultural manifestations in our new environments, right? And what happened after that and everything that we're doing up into contemporary times. But we are doing a disservice to the entire world when we count ourselves out of the history before enslavement. We're not going to have the right type of self-esteem. Our children won't have a good self-esteem if they don't understand what they came from before slavery. As a professor, I used to also teach children, and I refused to start the conversation on Black history, the little that was taught in U.S. history classes for K through 12. I refused to start at the cotton field because I was tasked with that, right? Starting slavery with the conversation at the cotton fields. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Let's talk about Timbuktu and universities and ancient libraries and how we were the center of knowledge and how people came to us to learn and to extract, and they still do, but we have to understand that context. So that is of complete importance. And if it's not taught, it will have, and it has, as you've seen, has a negative impact, not just on our world, but on our individual youth, especially, because you can see that they don't have the same type of self-esteem that they would have if they knew the greatness that they came from and the greatness that they possess. So it's extremely important that we teach that, and that we also teach it in the context of world history, because it's not just about Black history. This is world history. People came to ancient Africa from, when we're talking about the Greeks and the Romans, the people that define what is known as classical European civilizations learned from ancient Africans. Okay, so when we talk about world civilizations and we don't understand that we were the ones contributing to that before these so-called great civilizations existed, then we have a problem. And our children know that when they don't see themselves reflected And it's important for all children. Sorry, I'm gonna stop here, but it's important for all people and all children of regardless of their racial or cultural background to understand this so that we can respect each other and say, hey, you contributed, with this civilization and you contributed in this way, whether that's, the Chinese Empire or the empires that were in India or the Arab Empire or European empires or civilizations, just as African people did. And so we have to have that same understanding of all of our important contributions to the world. I have that question. Does globalization support the decimation of the Black culture? So again, I think, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. For one, I think we have to really be mindful of the language we use around decimation, annihilation, destruction, things like that, because I do think we have not been destroyed. This is why we're still here. Within our cultures and our history hasn't been destroyed. Is there an attempt to decimate that, to annihilate that by some parties? Absolutely. But I think that we also have to give our ancestors credit for maintaining it. And that's the reason why we can still stand here today and have these conversations. But it does have to be something that we continue to do in the future. Now, in terms of globalization, I think it depends on what you mean by globalization. When it comes to a Black culture, our culture, and I'm saying our in terms of the global Pan-African culture and all its various manifestations, because there are many around the world. When it comes to that, I believe globalization has impacted that in several ways. I think you have things such as cultural appropriation, which we see with the younger generations, especially obviously something of the past as well, but even in the present, with the influx of social media and the internet. And I think sometimes you can look at those things as a form of globalization, right? The fact that those things are easily accessible around the world. And I do believe in some ways, shape, or form, our culture can always not get the credit it deserves in those settings. So I do think that, but also in terms of globalization and the impact of influences on our actual culture, the other way around, if you will, I do think there's an interest in a lot of ways for our cultures to be kind of undermined and to put on the back burner in lieu of so-called Western or Eurocentric approaches to culture. And so I think that's something that we have to be mindful of and to really, push back against. Because, for example, I was in Guinea-Bissau last month, and that's in West Africa, south of Senegal. And it was my first time there, and I was kind of blown away by the difference between the village setting of Guinea-Bissau versus the city. And the city felt very much so, as an African city would in many ways, but there was so much still after, I think we lost them again, but I'll continue. After the Portuguese, even though the Portuguese have left decades ago, there's still a very European presence in cultural influence that I was kind of surprised by, to see so much of it there. And I think this idea that sometimes our communities, depending on where they are in the world, may prefer that kind of culture to their own is something that we have to be mindful of, and really working to preserve our culture. And that's not to say we can't learn from other cultures, but to not let that take precedent of our own and become elevated, especially in our own countries and communities.
As a fifth generation descendant of Sojourner Truth, what is it that you find most disturbing about the distortion of Black history and culture? And what do you think your ancestor, Miss Truth, would do to speak to young people?
Okay. I'm actually seventh generation descendant, but I think looking from her perspective, she was answering a call. Her work that she did wasn't about herself. It wasn't her. Because I'm sure she knew that everything she did, she would never be able to partake in it. She wouldn't be able to reap the benefits, so to speak. So the things that she did, her sacrifices, her journey, her pains, she wasn't doing them for herself. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't about self. It was about the future. It was about her legacy. It was about our generation, our time, and further. I think that she would be in some ways proud. Proud of what was accomplished or has been accomplished. But at the same time, she would be, and this is just me, I'm assuming, a little disappointed, maybe a lot of disappointed, because we've begun to take things for granted. Just because we don't have the obstacles that she had, just because legally we are seen as people now. There's, equity and equality. We still, we're lacking in both. But because things aren't as hard as they used to be, because we can go out and build businesses and become multimillionaires, we can lead Fortune 500 companies. We are, presidents, and we have access to things that she only dreamed or hoped for, or envisioned. We have those, but yet we've become complacent. And in that complacency, it's beginning to allow our history, our true history, to be erased, to be whitewashed. People aren't realizing, it's like our history isn't a theory. These are facts. What we went through, these are facts, documented facts. There's no hypothesis. It is not a theory. And I think our complacency has allowed that to creep in. I think that our complacency, it's kind of like, instead of being a community, instead of being a culture, instead of being the all-powerful that we are, it's become about me, myself, and I. And I'm sorry. Yeah. So it's like, that happened back then. We're okay. It's not that bad. I need to make this money. I need to get out in front. I need to make a name for myself. We're not going back to, the olden days or the past generations, but maybe we won't go back to that extent. But if we don't learn, if we don't grow, the cycles are going to continue, and it's going to manifest itself in different ways. And I think to me, that's important is for us to realize that, yeah, we may have some of it good, but it's not all good. And if we don't get ourselves together, we're going to end up in a worse shape than she was, because we're going to be erased. Everything is going to the melting pot. There's not going to be any real separation. How are we going to be able to identify who we were, the stories, our ancestors, the pain and the trauma? And I know Miss Joan had mentioned to me about blood memories. Those memories don't necessarily flow through our veins or our DNA, but they're still a part of us. And if we're not careful, they're trying to erase that. If we're not careful, our children's children will never know the true story. They don't know what we've been through. They don't know the sacrifices that were made. They will get lost and be comfortable in where they're at. And it defeats their purpose. It's in some ways an insult.
Okay, very insightful, and brought up a very important concept when you spoke to complacency. So I want you to take 60 seconds, if you can, at the risk of putting you on the spot, and elaborate on what you think we can do to thwart that complacency.
One, make sure that, sticking with the theme, making sure our stories are documented. When I read books, I like them in my hands. I like the paper turners, that's just my preference. But in order we have to make sure it has to become a priority that it is documented, that these stories, that these sacrifices, they remain to be documented, but it has to be presented in a way that future generations will accept and will hear. They don't learn the same way we do. So we need to evolve. They've got technologies and things at their hands. I used to have to go to the library, encyclopedias, actually do research, but that's not realistic in these days. But we have to make sure that they're educated, and not in a way where it's sugar-coated, but it has to catch them. They have to have a desire to know about where we came from. So by any means necessary, we want to do that. If it's, through your music, social media, different, forms of literature, poetry, you speak to their creative side. You do whatever is necessary to speak to the current generation about the past.
What are the statistics of reading levels in the United States of America? And why is reading as a construct of learning so important to our children? There's a follow-up question after that.
Okay. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. First of all, let me just give you a little bit of data from the NAEP test, which our fourth graders have to take. It's called the National Report Card, and it really tells us what students know and can do in reading. And the data is showing that there are 69% of our fourth graders in the United States who are reading at below grade level, 69%. And it's also showing that 64% of our eighth graders are reading below grade level. Now, the lowest fourth grade group, the lowest state that has the lowest number of students who are not reading at grade level, which is 76.9, is California. So you see that we have a major critical issue going on with literacy. I also want to address the adult illiteracy, which cost America $2.2 trillion. So America, the adult literacy is also at a low level. So it's like it's trickling down from these elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, all the way into college and adulthood. So we have a major issue here. What do we want literacy to do? We want kids to be able to not only decode words, but we want them to understand the meaning. Meaning is so important, and not just meaning from rote and memorization, but from a cognitive perspective.
Fantastic. And really quickly, Doc, could you give a little bit of your background? We did introductions earlier, and we had a chance to get to you, but we want to just give everyone a chance to share your expertise, your education, and why you're able to speak on the subject.
Okay. I have a master's degree. Let me go back to my bachelor's degree. I have a bachelor's degree in elementary education and kindergarten. I have a master's degree in literacy. I've taught literacy in kindergarten through 12th grade, so beginning and the higher ed of schools. I have been an academic coach, a district academic coach in a school district. I have been an assistant principal, a curriculum specialist, principal for about 10 years. I've been a university professor where I've taught early literacy and reading in the content area. I've taught internationally, again, for literacy. So my whole life pretty much has centered around literacy. I have a PhD in literacy and leadership. So I have over 30 years of experience in the classroom and higher ed.
Okay. All righty. So again, thank you so much for joining us back for the second half of the summit. Wonderful performance by our drum and dance troupe. We have a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up with our call to action. But we're going to go ahead and get back to the action so we can go ahead and get some more wonderful information from our experts and get a global insight on how to move our culture forward. So going on to our next question, we have Ms. Omora McKenzie. Ms. Omora, are you with us?
I'm here.
Fantastic. So your question is, how do you believe the absence of Black people in literature will potentially further impact the mental health of our Black children socially? And does that transcend to their view and empathy of others?
Okay. So good afternoon, and thank you for that question. And it's several parts to that to address, but the first part I believe to address is that there is a lack of identity when it comes to the individual. If they're unable to see any kind of representation for themselves, how are they able to identify and connect? And then that leads to, I believe, an inability to connect with others, not just with themselves. And that also, I believe, connects to emotional intelligence. So when you have emotional intelligence, you're able to understand other points of views, feelings, compassion, what have you. And if a person is unable to understand that with others, they're unable to have it for themselves either. So when you have a lack of compassion for yourself and awareness, it leads to social anxiety, poor coping skills, an inability to connect with others. And this doesn't just start in childhood, it starts there, but it transcends into adulthood as well. So that impacts not only your ability to function in day-to-day society, but your ability to build lasting, connecting, healthy relationships.
Our next question goes to Dr. Teresa Carter. Are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
I appreciate you. And the rubbles of our Black history post-pandemic, why do we need to preserve this history and the severity on the need to preserve this history?
Well, let's begin with what, the healthcare system in America is a tale of two countries. The wealthy and insured individuals have different experiences with the healthcare delivery system than uninsured, underinsured, and poor, people. And so there's a general awareness that we have a problem with our healthcare system before the pandemic. We know that we spend $18 billion of our budget, of the U.S. budget, is spent on healthcare, but we get very little in return. So that set the stage for inequity, set the stage for calamity when COVID hit. When COVID hit, it just blew the lid off, and it was unavoidable, that we did not, that we could see, everyone could see that something was wrong with our healthcare system. I guess my experience, during that period of time, it was one of, I was trying to get healthcare for my husband at the particular time. And I think that regardless of that, I think we all can recall that we saw things we never saw before. As people tried to negotiate with the system and with the whole shutdown, people, having to go into the hospitals and never seeing their loved ones again. So we saw some things, and I began to wonder. I said, well, when this is all over with, or decades in the future, when we when we look in the rearview mirror, what will be in our collective memory about what is happening now? More importantly, what will be written, in the public domain as far as what happened? So it's important for us to, I thought, for us to have people document their experience, give an account for what we were exposed to as Black and Brown people. We suffered disproportionately, and because of our the disproportionate impact of chronic illnesses among our population, that made us more vulnerable to COVID and made the treatments less successful. So it's important for us to understand what people experienced so that they can layer it with an understanding of what conditions or what situations aggravated their situation, as well as what factors enable them to endure. And then we will be able to position ourselves to deal with any other or say a crisis in the future. And as I think about it, we have to be able to tease out the themes that come from these experiences as people document, as we collect this information and form research questions to test, to figure out what the answers are, as of course testing according to scientific methods. Do the research, do the analysis, put it in front of the policymakers, determine what ways this information can provide us with answers to how dollars can be better spent, how a greater number of people can be serviced through our systems. So these are the kinds of things that I was excited, to learn from Elaine, that TBD, the global network is focused on, and all of what the presenters are talking about in terms of documenting. That is the only thing that we should be. Well, it's one of the most important things that we should focus on, because if we don't make sure that we know what has happened and position ourselves to be able to project what needs to be done, then we are destined to be caught up in a cyclical, situation.
Thank you, everyone. I think that we've had a very informative educational summit. I want to thank all of our presenters, our panelists. It has been a wonderful experience. I guess we did have a rocky start, but I think we have wonderful content. The objectives of the summit were to create enough content for a trailer to build coalition. So I invite everyone here to go to tmbglobalfoundation.org. There is a page to register. We are employing people to register and become part of the movement. And so I'd like at this time, if you could maybe write this information down, tmbglobalfoundation.org. And again, I want to thank everyone here. Our panelists were outstanding. They came prepared. We have subject matter experts. I hope you've all learned something from each other as well. We hope to be able to project this out to a community and be able to share in the experiences of preservation of culture and Black literature. We touched on many subjects from healthcare to finance to our history beyond slavery. Dr. Gary, I think, did a wonderful job. Dr. Carter, thank you so much for telling us about healthcare. Amora, Mackenzie, you did a wonderful job in the social sciences, and that's so appreciated. Marika, to be able to talk about the blood memory and why it's so important that we don't take anything for granted at this time. That we cannot say enough about that. Dr. Gwendolyn Levert, we thank you for informing us about the science of reading. The science of reading, I mean, that is something that we really have to delve into a lot deeper. It's very academic, but it's something that's going to affect the entire country. But certainly our Black and brown children will be impacted most, because we know that for the reasons that Attorney Fluker stated and others, that our children are normally the most impacted in the underserved community. So we just really want to lift up those things in particular. Attorney Fluker did a wonderful job in talking about building wealth and how we preserve our wealth and what's important in doing so. So again, we thank her for sharing with us a lot of data that we can actually go to and support what she was telling us with Senator Levin's report. So we thank her for that. The Iman Pasha coming from New York and talking about the inflation, the stagnation in the underserved communities. He did a wonderful job as well. Our moderators, Joan Washington, our educator and our cultural specialist, lit a very intuitive response to many of the questions based off of her own experience in culture. So we just want to thank her for all of her efforts in help putting this together. Our moderators were second to none. They jumped in and they helped us. We had the technical difficulties here. So we want to thank Jerome Buckley for continuing always to support us in our endeavors as we stand on the shoulders of the legacy of the Michigan Banner, which through the DNA of the Michigan Banner has always been to lead in diversity. So we thank you guys. We thank you. And I don't think I missed anyone. I think, and the dancers were outstanding. So that was a pleasant break to have the young people. And so again, we're starting out. This is our first summit. We hope to be able to do it again. Carl Williams is going to be taking a look at this, our independent film producer. And so he was coming in from Dubai. And so he is actually has a global perspective as well. So we have a deep bench of experts that we will be drawing from again when we start to go and to begin to further make this documentary. But again, I want to thank everyone's participation, and we appreciate all of you taking out your time on a Saturday. And again, thank you.